Hello everyone, welcome back to another video with On Point Politics, your number one stop for all things political news and election analysis that isn't beholden to any mainstream media source. And so today, we're going to be talking about an early look of the 2028 presidential election. Hit the like button and subscribe for more content just like this, and make sure to hit the notification bell so you don't miss any other videos that we put on this channel. So, looking at the betting odds for the Republican nomination, JD Vance is holding very ahead at about 45 cents per share, a overwhelming lead against the other contenders in the possible primary. You have Vivek Ramaswamy, Donald Trump Jr., Ron DeSantis kind of running up the ranks, but in the low single digits. And so what's happening is JD Vance is clearing about a consistent plurality of the electorate, and everybody else is just kind of breaking up this non-Vance vote. And that's going to give Vance the primary. Will he win every single state in the primary? It's possible. But if Donald Trump endorses him around 2027, 2028, you may have a very easy primary for Republicans, and it may be a clean sweep in the 2028 presidential election for JD Vance to gain the Republican nomination. Gavin Newsom, on the other hand, is sitting at just about 17 cents per share, with Josh Shapiro right behind him at about 13 cents per share. And that's very fascinating because everybody in the Democrat nomination is splitting about pretty evenly. You have a couple people in the low single digits, like, for example, AOC, Tim Walz, but you even have talks of a Kamala Harris possibly running in 2028. There was an article that just came out today that actually basically said that pretty much her political plays are open for 2028 in terms of the presidency or running for governor of California. For Kamala Harris, it actually seems like she may run in 2028 or possibly run for governor in 2026 in the state of California, according to an article that was just released today. With it being so early, we're going to use the top two leaders in the betting odds, those being JD Vance and Gavin Newsom, to do this early deep dive into the 2028 presidential election. JD Vance, whose rise to prominence has been nothing short of remarkable. JD Vance is from Middleton, Ohio, where his family grew up in Appalachian culture, which valued loyalty and patriotism despite widespread social challenges. Vance's early life was shaped by family instability, including his mother's struggles with addiction and failed relationships. His grandparents, who had had their own battles with alcoholism, became his guardians and pushed him toward a brighter future. With his grandmother's tough love and guidance, Vance went on to graduate from Ohio State University and Yale Law School, achieving the American dream. Vance's story resonates deeply with working-class Americans. He's seen poverty firsthand, worked minimum wage jobs, and understands the frustrations of everyday voters who feel left behind by government systems that often reward bad behavior over hard work. His connection to Middle America is personal and genuine, making him a relatable and compelling figure for Republican voters. Gavin Newsom, who comes from a very different background, but also faces his share of challenges. Born in San Francisco, Newsom is a fourth-generation Californian with deep ties to the state's elite. His father, William Newsom III, was a state appeals court judge and attorney for Getty Oil, and the Getty family played a major role in helping Newsom start his business ventures. Despite his privileges, Newsom's childhood wasn't without struggle. His parents divorced when he was 3, and his mother worked multiple jobs to support the family. Newsom also battled severe dyslexia, which still affects him today. These experiences taught him resilience and shaped his approach to leadership. After graduating from Santa Clara University, Newsom built a successful business empire, including wineries, restaurants, and retail ventures. His entrepreneurial spirit translated into politics, where he's championed progressive causes like same-sex marriage, universal health care, and climate action. Newsom's polished and charismatic image appeals to urban and coastal voters, but his elite connections sometimes make it difficult for him to connect with Middle America. There are so many states that are really going to go basically either way, essentially. Deep red or deep blue states, those being Alabama, Missouri, Tennessee, Mississippi for JD Vance. And then you have California, Massachusetts, Vermont, and Maryland for Gavin Newsom. There's not really a landslide obliteration like a 1980 Reagan environment for either one of them, at least right now. Depends on how the Trump administration performs. And this is what I'm going to get into. This is going to be a referendum election on the Trump administration. And so now the Republicans are not going to have the benefit of it being a referendum on the Democrats. This is going to be a pure referendum on Trump's performance in the White House. But if the economy gets better, if voters essentially get what they want in terms of, illegal immigration, as well as the economy, including a lot of the gutting the deep state, you're going to get a pretty successful translation in the Electoral College for JD Vance in 2028. At least that's my personal opinion. So here's the thing. If Donald Trump performs well in office, if the economy is good, if the Doge department does really good with Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, if they expose how tax dollars are being spent and they save money for American people, if Trump is able to stop all these foreign wars and is able to bring energy back to the country, his administration will be popular because it's going to reflect in the economy and people's taxes. And so that is really what's going to shape the 2028 election. It's going to be a referendum on what Trump promised to do in the White House. And so if that works out effectively, somebody like Vance, who can articulate very well, as we saw in the debate with him and Tim Walz, you're going to get a very good environment for somebody like JD Vance. Gavin Newsom, on the other hand, had a debate with Ron DeSantis and could barely even debate DeSantis. DeSantis, despite not being able to debate in the Republican primaries, was able to blow away Gavin Newsom in a one-on-one debate, bringing up policies from California, the fact that people have been leaving California, moving to Florida, as well as Gavin's own in-laws moved to the state of Florida as well. And they apparently even had a conversation with DeSantis about it themselves. And so clearly, Gavin Newsom, with California losing population, the 2030 census will probably reflect that loss. That is not a good argument going into a late decade election where that is going to be brought up. They are going to bring up the fact that the state is losing population. And so if your state's losing population at a rapid rate and other states are gaining, and yours is Democrat and the other one's Republican, clearly people are finding more interest in a state that is Republican than is Democrat because they may find better incentives to move to that state. And so going in with that record on top of a popular JD Vance / Donald Trump administration, whatever you want to call it, when you go into that with a popular Trump administration, you're going to find a very hard time for Gavin to be able to combat Vance in the debate stage or even just campaign in general. Gavin Newsom, in my opinion, also doesn't really appeal to a lot of black voters. His whole kind of slick back, close to elite kind of style of appearance and demeanor, I don't really think would necessarily appeal to a lot of African-American voters. To even prove this, he has like a 40-something% approval rating in California. And Alice Intel in October, the most accurate national pollster in the United States, alongside Rasmussen and, the People's Pundit, Alice Intel actually showed that right now, Gavin Newsom's national approval rating is about 27%. Now, of course, if he were to jump into the race, that would go up. But how much up is it going to go? Is it going to go up 10, 15, 20%? No one really knows. Now, of course, they're going to have the media behind them, but the media by that time is going to be taken over by independent podcasters. That's going to be the path to the presidency in 2028, which is a place that JD Vance really thrives in. Now, the difference is Gavin, I feel like, could also do a good job in that kind of setting in terms as a person, in terms of communicating. I think he could do well. But in terms of the actual policy, I think if Vance and Trump are successful in the administration and Gavin continues to have people leaving his state, I think it's going to be a really big problem for him going into the 2028 presidential election. So what's the big picture? JD Vance's connection to working class and rural voters, coupled with his focus on law and order, immigration, economic growth, gives him an edge in competitive states like the Rust Belt and the South. Gavin Newsom dominates the coast and urban centers, but struggles to expand his appeal into the middle of the country. This combination leads to my prediction of 312 electoral votes for Vance to 226 for Newsom. But remember, this is an early prediction. Campaigns, debates, and unforeseen events could drastically shift these numbers as the election nears. What do you think? Will these margins hold? Are we in for surprises as the campaign heats up? Let me know your predictions in the comments down below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more in-depth analysis for elections. Arizona is Vance plus 2.08, a state trending red as the GOP strengthens its appeal to Hispanic and suburban voters. State of Nevada, according to my forecast, is Vance plus 4.78. Similar to Arizona, Nevada's working class voters are leaning towards Vance economic and immigration policies. Georgia, Vance plus 2.03. The GOP's rural turnout strategy keeps Georgia red as of right now. Georgia is Vance plus 2. The GOP's rural turnout strategy keeps Georgia in the red column. North Carolina is Vance plus 4. While trending Republican, it remains competitive with its growing urban areas. Michigan at Vance plus 2, Wisconsin at Vance plus 1, and Pennsylvania at Vance plus 1. These Rust Belt states are razor thin but are leaning red, reflecting Vance's strong economic and cultural messaging. A state like Texas is Vance plus 11. The GOP's edge is secure but slightly diminished from 2024 due to demographic shifts in urban areas. New Mexico is Newsom plus 5, a narrow Democratic lead, but the GOP is gaining ground with Hispanic voters. Maine at large, Newsom plus 6, is blue overall, but its second district is Vance plus 13, supports the GOP, reflecting rural concerns. New Hampshire is Newsom plus 8, continues to trend Democratic due to strong Southern turnout, but remains slightly competitive. Minnesota, Newsom plus 6, a traditional Democrat stronghold, though rural areas are shifting towards the GOP. Vance at plus 12 in the state of Florida at Vance plus 12 is a GOP stronghold with its diverse but conservative electorate. Colorado, Newsom plus 13. Suburban moderates keep the state blue, but not by an overwhelming margin. Virginia, Newsom plus 8. Once a battleground, now leans blue with rural areas continuing to favor Republicans. Ohio, Vance plus 14, and Iowa, Vance plus 12. These states are red-leaning but remain vital to Vance's Rust Belt coalition. Another big surprise for this election that is actually coming up today, we can actually go ahead and look this up. This is very, very fascinating. So, according to the Daily Mail, Kamala 2028 is actually on the table. It says here that insiders reveal Harris may still have her sights set on the White House. Donald Trump's transition approval in November of 2016 was plus 1. Now it's plus 18. So clearly Americans are a lot more comfortable with somebody like Donald Trump coming into the White House while he's transitioning his administration into the White House. But his approval has gone up and is reflective of the new GOP coalition and actually spells very good news for somebody like J.D. Vance, who came out more popular in exit polling like CNN back in the 2024 presidential election. According to a new national poll, favorability of the Republican and Democratic Party show Republicans at 44%, with Democrats at 38%. More Americans will accept Donald J. Trump as the legitimate president than in 2016, according to Gallup. As of right now, 91% of voters find his election to be legitimate. We see that Republicans back in 2016 were at 96%. Now they're at 99%, basically all of them. And now Democrats were at 77% in 2016. And now at 2024, they're at 84%. A new national poll shows the reactions to Donald Trump's election win. In 2016, 75% of voters were surprised. Now just 41% are surprised at his victory. 34% were devastated in 2016. Now that has gone down to 29%. Proud is at 32% in 2016, and it's now at 40%. Excited was at 35% in 2016. Now that number's at 42%. Relieved was at 40%, and now that's at 46%. More positive reactions from a Donald Trump win. President-elect Trump viewed much more favorably by Americans than Kamala Harris, new Gallup poll finds. Donald Trump has a 48% approval rating to Kamala's 42% national approval rating, indicating if there was a rematch, Donald Trump would actually win the popular vote by roughly about 10 points in a head-to-head matchup, which would flip states like Illinois, New York, as well as even make states like California and Maryland even slightly competitive compared to years past. Kamala Harris considers 2028 presidential run or a run for California governor in 2026, according to Politico. Harris is telling her advisors and allies to keep her political options open. She is expected to explore those and other possible paths forward with family members over the winter holiday season. So this is the big catch. The big catch is Kamala Harris is considering a 2028 presidential run. And so if that actually ends up happening, if she were to run for the nomination, I would suspect that the party donors would not let her lose that nomination slot out of concerns of you're violating DEI. You're going to elect, there's the first black woman president. You're not going to be able to elect her now because you're going to pick somebody else. They're basically going to shame the voters into picking her, and they're going to make phone calls and tell people, hey, you should not run because Kamala's going to run and it's her turn. She has to win the presidency. It's going to be the first black woman in this and that, even though we all know really it's a much, much deeper connection than that. There's more than likely a lot of deep state ties to her. As you know, her and Diddy are friends, and Diddy's got a lot of connections, and there's a lot of problems with him going on right now, and that would explain why she got so many celebrity endorsements from all these people that were somehow akin to Diddy for the most part. And so going into 2028, if she were to announce today that she were to run, they would not let her lose the primary. They would rig it again like they did it to Bernie Sanders in 2016, and in 2020, they would rig it once again for Kamala Harris, and she would be the nominee if she decides to run, more than likely. A Vance-Harris election, I believe, even if the Trump administration is mediocre, I still think would result in a Vance win. Usually when you nominate a losing candidate who's never won an election before, it can be really risky. Nixon was able to pull it off, but somebody like a Bryan in the 1800s, I believe his name was William Bryan, he didn't do well at all. He got nominated 3 times and he lost all 3 elections. And so nominating somebody who's lost once and hasn't won a national election before to run again is a very risky proposition for the party. Now, if the economy gets bad and the Trump administration is not popular, maybe she does eke out a win with the Rust Belt states or ekes it out in Georgia or something to that effect. But Vance being on the ticket would be able to counter that with actual enthusiasm. And I think she would encounter a lot of problems because she's actually in the race for an extended period of time now. It's not like she's only in there for 3 months and that's it. She's in there for a longer period of time, which lets people see a lot of her vulnerabilities that she was already had exposed in this presidential election already, like her not being able to effectively communicate, not being able to sit down for long form interviews, not being able to take questions from the press or the media. So that's also a really big issue for her going into 2028. Here's the thing. Vance is relatable to a lot of people, and the Theo Von podcast actually really helped him out back in October. A lot of people in the comment section, you see, oh my God, I thought this guy was supposed to be weird. He's actually super relatable and funny. So there's a lot of misconceptions about Vance because of the whole weird hit pieces they were trying to give him. So now a lot of people are coming to the conclusion that Vance is not as weird as the medium was trying to make him out to be. And so that's going to really help him in 2028, especially the debate. The debate with Tim Walz helped him massively in that regard, 100%. When you contrast a young ex-Democrat style kind of politician like Vance, they are Vance's family is like old collar former Democrats, those ancestral Democrats. That's really what it is. And you have this old guard establishment Democrat like a Tim Walz going against a younger guy like Vance. The contrast was complete night and day. And so Vance going into 2028, I think against almost anybody could probably win as of right now. I even think he'd have a good chance at beating Shapiro. I think Shapiro's very overrated. I think that Shapiro has a lot of skeletons in the closet that if they were to come out at the national level, they would be a really big problem for him going into the 2028 election. And he's also not optically fit either. The guy's like 5'5", 5'6". Vance is like 6'1". At a national debate, you're going to see the height difference, and a lot of people are not going to expect it, and it's actually going to end up being a very big problem for him optically. A lot of women, according to TikToks and this and that, actually find Vance to be physically attractive, which is something that helped Warren Harding win the 1920 election. The first time that women were allowed to vote, and he won in this massive landslide, was because women came out to him to vote because they found him massively attractive. Vance has that same appeal with women voters, and that's actually going to create a small dent in the Democrat coalition going into the 2028 presidential election, which I actually think would help him out in states like Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, and Nevada, kind of shore up the Sun Belt and only have to pick off one of the Rust Belt states in 2028. Now that we've been talking about a Vance versus Newsom matchup, let's head over to the electoral map where we can see where each state is going to go.
Like we see here, J.D. Vance is at 45% odds to win the Republican nomination, to Vivek's 9%, below that Ron DeSantis at 5%, and Donald Trump Jr. at 8% betting odds right now. We see Gavin Newsom is the leader at 17 cents per share, with Josh Shapiro at 13 cents per share, with Gretchen Whitmer at 9 cents, and Kamala Harris at 6% due to polling that has her up in the 40s in a potential hypothetical primary. So looking at the electoral map with the two betting front runners, Gavin Newsom and J.D. Vance, Utah, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, the Dakotas, all of Nebraska, all of, the 1st congressional district, the at-large vote for Nebraska are all red. Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, West Virginia, Missouri are all in the safe Republican column as of right now. The metrics I am using for the safe classifications are going to be a plus 10 margin or more, likely is 5 to 10. So this secondary color right here, a lean margin is 1 to 5 points. So this third margin or color right here, and the last one is anything under 1%, is this last color right here. Looking at Iowa and Ohio, these will be over 10-point victories for J.D. Vance, including South Carolina, Texas, and Florida, granting him 215 safe electoral college votes, as well as Alaska in that safe column. We can see over here that California, Oregon, Washington, Colorado will all be in that safe category, as well as the District of Columbia, Maryland, Massachusetts, and Vermont. These states will all be in that category, including Rhode Island, as well as the state of Delaware will be in that plus 10 category in the 2028 election. We will now go to the state of North Carolina. J.D. Vance, somebody who appeals to more women voters, appeals to more normie type voters with a strong Trump economy, would potentially win North Carolina by about 6 points. Donald Trump won the state by nearly 4 points in this election cycle, and I think that J.D. will reverse some of that suburban trend away from Donald Trump and improve in some of the rural areas in the state of North Carolina. Looking at a place like Arizona, Vance's gains with Hispanic voters will continue and push over to the state and potentially grant a 7 to 8 point win in the state of Arizona for J.D. Vance, expanding from Trump's victory in 2024. The same thing goes for the state of Nevada. Donald Trump was able to make huge gains in the state by nearly winning Clark and Washoe County. And I believe with a popular Trump administration and somebody like Gavin Newsom, who doesn't appeal to middle ground voters, would lose people in Clark and Washoe and push the state over 5 points. However, we see in the state of Georgia, which has the Atlanta suburbs becoming more African American and moving away from people like, the Democrats or the Republicans, I should actually say, a state like Georgia may actually still be under 5, but it's probably going to be a 2 to 4 point win for JD, probably about a 3-point victory. Right now, Donald Trump won the state by 2.2% in this election cycle. Looking at other states, New Mexico, yes, the Hispanics are going to be moving to the right, but I think that those college-educated whites moving left are going to hurt the state's chances of going in the Republican column. I do think it'll get slightly closer, probably about a 5 to a 5.5 point win. Hawaii will also be in that safe column. I also think Illinois and New York will be over 10 points in the 2024 election, including the state of Connecticut. I don't really see why these would be under 10. I think Gavin's going to improve in some college educated or credentialed elitist areas, and I think that that'll basically expand into Illinois and New York and will kind of offset gains Vance makes base with rural voters. However, I do think a state like Maine could potentially move a little bit to the right with Vance on the ticket. Maybe it is just a 5-point win for Gavin. Maybe it's a little bit closer than about that. Maybe it's about a 3-point win, but I do see that being the case. New Hampshire, though, I think with all those Boston implants moving into New Hampshire and the southern part, I think the state's probably going to be gone for Vance. I don't really think he's going to be able to make any gains in a place like New Hampshire. I think that more than likely Pennsylvania will be an ultimate factor. And I think somebody like Gavin may not do so well in a place like Pennsylvania. He probably loses it by 3 to 4 points, expanding the margin of defeat that Kamala Harris had against Donald Trump. Michigan and Wisconsin, we'd see similar stories. Somebody like JD appeals a lot better to the Rust Belt states than even somebody like Trump could. And somebody like Gavin, who is a part of the Western global elitism, I think is definitely going to play a huge factor into JD easily winning these battlegrounds. I also think a state like Virginia could become ultra competitive due to Gavin Newsom probably doing a little bit worse with African-American voters in this area, which would be enough to push the state at about a roughly Newsom +4 margin. I mean, it was roughly about a Harris +6 margin. So I think a Newsom +4.5 point victory is expected out of Virginia. And I even think out of Minnesota, I think we're going to get a close race out of there. It's probably going to be a very narrow race in the state. Maybe it's about a 1.2 or 1 to 2 point win. You know, right here, Minnesota was a 4-point win for Harris. So probably maybe it's a 1 to 2 point win for somebody like a Newsom as of right now. And in New Jersey, I do think we'd get a pretty close race, but it would be nowhere near a flipping. But I still think it'd be probably a 1 to 3 point race for Newsom. And Nebraska second, I think would be the one place that ends up narrowly going to JD. I don't really think Gavin would perform too well in the district. So I think JD would actually probably end up winning back that district and improve one electoral vote from Trump's Electoral College win back in 2024 with this map. Now, if the party picks Kamala Harris to run against JD again, I think you're going to get a way different election. Let's assume that Donald Trump's presidency ends up being positive and all of his policy plans essentially go through. That would be very good for somebody like JD. And I think somebody like Kamala Harris, with all of the campaigning, with all of the ways that she avoided the press, avoided podcasting, doing all those things, I think they would attempt a similar strategy. And I think that it being prolonged would not really work out for them. And I actually think she would do very poorly in the Electoral College. You know, states like Utah, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, the Dakotas, all of Nebraska, all of these Appalachian states, Ohio, Iowa, South Carolina, Florida, Texas. I think those would all be in that column. As of right now, I think Alaska would be over 10 points for JD Vance. I also believe that as of right now, Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, and Nevada would all be over 5-point wins for Vance. He'd be winning Arizona by close to like 9, Nevada by like 6 or 7, Georgia by 5, North Carolina by 8. The margins would just be really big. Kamala Harris's approval rating is drastically down from even election day, and it would show in the Electoral College. I think Colorado would probably be like an 8 to 9 point win. I think that Illinois would go under 10 points. I think it'd be about a 6 to 7 point win. And I think Vermont, Massachusetts, Maryland, DC, Rhode Island, Connecticut, I think those states will be in the likely column. And I also think that a state like Pennsylvania could actually be in that likely Republican column, with Michigan and Wisconsin being in that lean Republican column still. And this pushes New Jersey to flip in the Electoral College. I also think Minnesota would be very competitive, but I think it would stay with Kamala. I think New Mexico, with the gains that Vance would make with Hispanics, I think he'd beat Kamala Harris with Hispanics nationwide by about 5 points. That also flips New Mexico narrowly into the Republican column, very, very narrowly. I even think a state like Virginia could be very close. I think it still holds on to Harris, but it would be very narrow. I also think Maine, the independents there, I don't really think would like the idea of somebody like a Kamala coming back. So I think that they would get way more competitive. I think Maine would essentially come down to the wire. I think Vance does win New Hampshire, and states like New York as well as Delaware would be way more competitive than usual. And I think Hawaii would probably still be safe, and Vance would probably pick off the 2nd congressional district. This gives JD 336 in the Electoral College to Harris's 202 Electoral College votes as of right now.
If you guys liked the video, make sure to hit the like button and to subscribe if you want more content just like this, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss another video just like this. I will see you guys in the next video.